The Laurel Award for Screen is given to the member of the Guild who, in the opinion of the current Board of Directors, has advanced the literature of the motion picture through the years, who has made outstanding contributions to the profession of the screenwriter. And so, with our respect and our love, this year, Laurel Award for Screen goes to Mr. Talented Daniel Taradash.
I'll confess something. All my life, I've wanted a standing ovation. My father wanted me to be a lawyer. You don't know how many times in the last 50 years I've agreed with him. Not tonight. Tonight, the Writers Guild has validated my choice of profession. Tonight, it's made me a born-again screenwriter. Finally, two more men. Without them, I'm sure I wouldn't be here tonight in getting this award. Everlasting thanks to the memory of James Jones for writing that profane, pornographic, brilliant novel, From Here to Eternity, and to Harry Cohn for having the foresight and courage to make a movie out of it. Now, if I can break the time barrier for a few more seconds, and if you'll forgive me for closing the slightly scabrous incident. It was between these two, Cohn, the fearsome president of Columbia Pictures, a man with a large sense of his own importance, and Jones, the Tarantino of his time. I was in Cohn's office one day when Jones walked in. He handed Cohn a copy of his novel. Harry turned to the flyleaf and asked for an inscription. And I watched Jimmy's pen as he wrote it, from one fuck-up to another.
No one ever We asked Dan to tell us about a career that has made him one of the most admired and honored screenwriters in an art that is not always considered admirable, honorable, or an art. Dan helped change all that. Fade in, Dan, on your life. How did you get started as a writer?
Well, I guess the very first taste of writing was in high school, in a small high school in a small town, Miami Beach, which in the 1920s was very small. There were 30 in my graduating class. And I remember winning a $5 gold piece for writing an essay on Helen Keller. And $5 then was probably like $100 today, so it was a thrill. And I don't know that that made me want to be a writer, but when I went to Harvard College, I took a writing course in my first year and enjoyed it very much, and I got some praise from the instructor. And then there was a class given by a very well-known writer of that time. That was around, I think I took the class about 1933, which is the year I graduated from college. And he was giving a special class in writing, which was limited to, I don't remember how many, about 20 students, and you had to interview them and so forth, which I did. I got in the class. He incidentally won the Pulitzer Prize for history, but he also at the same time was writing boy-girl stories for the Saturday Evening Post. So he was an extraordinary man. And I really liked that. I think that's where I really decided, I'm not going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a writer. At any rate, when I was in law school, I wrote a play which I sent to an agent in New York who said it was not possible to get it produced, but she gave me a lot of encouragement. When I graduated from law school, my father was very happy because he wanted me to be a lawyer. I was the only child, and he had had this in his brain, I guess, since conception, since I was conceived. I said to him, look, I'd like to go to New York. I want to write plays, which is actually what I really wanted to do. And I'd like to go to New York and spend a year in New York looking at the theater, going to every play, good ones and bad ones. And I'd like to write a play. And you supported me for 7 years. Give me one more year. My father, who was a very wise man, said, well, I think you're a damn fool. If you had asked me for 5 years or 10 years of money to become a writer, I would have conceded that, well, that makes some sense. But this is ridiculous, but I'm going to do it. He said, I'm going to do it because in 10 years from now, I don't want you saying to me that if you had only given me that one extra year, I would be Shakespeare. So that's, but then I fooled him. I wrote the play. It won a nationwide contest, sponsored by the motion picture companies, incidentally. The play was about a sit-down strike, which at that time, which was 1930, I wrote it in 1937, probably 36 and 37, in 37. And it was about a sit-down strike in a vacuum cleaner factory. I had never been in a factory, but this was a symbol of the times. It was the beginning of the spread of sit-down strikes. And the entire play took place inside the factory. The theme was was a lament that unions weren't getting better pay and so forth, which is interesting because here I am, having been a member of this union for so many years. The play won the contest, and at that point, Columbia Pictures was going to make a picture of a very well-known play by Clifford Odets called Golden Boy. And the script had been written by a couple of old-timers, and Ruben Mamoulian, who was a very famous director, had been signed to direct the picture. And he took a look at the script, and he said, not for me, to Harry Cohen, the head of the company. I'm going to go to New York and see if I can get Clifford Odets to do it. He would be the ideal man. Well, he saw Odets, and Odets was then having a heated love affair with Louise Reiner, whom he had married. I don't remember whether this was before the marriage or after the marriage, but there was a good deal of heat in it, and there was a good deal of anger in it, and she had left for Paris, and Odets was in no mood to write anything. He was going after her, and he told Mamoulian, some other time I might have done it, but I'm not going to do it. At that point, well, I think the story editor of Columbia in New York said, why don't you look at some of the things these people are writing in this course that we put up money for. So he read some material. We were all writing plays, and he read portions of the plays of all of us. And he liked two of us very much. One was Louis Meltzer, and the other was myself. And he said, I think I got a notion. I tell you what, I called Meltzer and me together. He said, I can't choose between you. I think either of you might be able to write this script. But what I'll do is have you both, I'll put you on salary, and I'll have you both write me the first 20 pages of how you see the screenplay. And on the basis of that, I'll choose one of you. I must say that Mamoulian had a very definite idea of how he wanted this script written and the way it progressed, and also the play itself was a basic piece of structure, and it was extremely well written, and dialogue was very pungent.
We got a hearts. We got a souls. We got to take care of them, huh? Joe, listen to me. Do what is in your heart, not in your head.
So we took us each about a week or 10 days, I don't recall, about 2 weeks a week. And then we gave what we had written to Mamoulian, and he called us back, and he said, I still can't choose between the two of you. I'll take you both.
Did you come to Hollywood to write the screenplay of Golden Boy, or did you write it in New York?
No, we wrote it in Victorville, actually. We both came out to the studio, and we were going to write it at the studio, of course. And Mamoulian was having terrible trouble with Harry Cohen. This was really a match made in hell. And Mamoulian would be felt insulted by Cohen, because I remember one thing he said. Mamoulian was famous for rather odd angles in his pictures. And Cohen one day said to him, you don't see a camera coming out of Frank Capra's ass. And Mamoulian walked out. At any rate, Mamoulian said to him, let me take these two guys to a ranch, a guest ranch I know near Victorville, and I'll bring you back the script in 8 weeks. And we wrote it in Victorville. Meltzer and I became lifelong friends. Mamoulian was a charming, interesting, highly cultured man, and I would think I had many other experiences in writing scripts and meeting directors, but that still is one I remember very, very affectionately.
Dan, how would you describe your working day? How do you get going? Do you sharpen pencils, or what?
Well, assuming I'm not under the gun, if it's something they have to shoot the next morning or something like that, that's very special stuff, which I've done also. But I start the day of writing around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the reasons I wanted to become a writer was I like to sleep late in the morning. Another reason was that I'm very fast on a typewriter. I used to type about close to 100 words a minute. Seems like ridiculous reasons, but it sort of blends in with how I write. I find every possible excuse not to start. I go get a Coca-Cola, or I know there's a phone call I forgot to make, or there's some notes I want to look at, or I hope somebody rings the front doorbell, anything. But finally I get started, and I usually write 3-4 hours. And then very often, particularly when I was younger, I would write very late at night. I would start at 10 or 11 and write till 2, something like that. And I tried, unlike I think many, many writers, I tried to give it the first draft my very best shot. I would rewrite a scene 10 times before I would put it into a first draft. Well, that's about the way if I got an assignment today, that's about the way I would approach it, I think.
When you finish the first draft, do you then go back to page 1?
Well, not necessarily. I wrote the first draft of Picnic. Bill Holden had a commitment with Columbia, and Holden, of course, his first picture was Golden Boy. He had a commitment with Columbia, which he had turned down in many, many scripts that they had sent him. And I wrote a first draft of Picnic and handed it in to Cohen, the story editor, and so on. They liked it very much. They arranged for a luncheon with Holden, who was then at Paramount, and me at Paramount. And Bill had read the script, and he sat down with me, and he said, "Did they pay you anything extra for writing a final draft and writing first draft on the cover?" And he said, "I'll do the picture," which was a very lovely moment.
In Golden Boy and Picnic, you were working from successful stage plays.
Right.
Is that a big help or not?
It is a big help. I did one other play, screenplay, which is based on a play called Bell, Book, and Candle.
Oh, now don't tell me you're getting angry.
I am not angry. I'm sorry.
Well, how do you think I feel to suddenly find out that you just haven't been there the whole time and it's all been a sort of a merry little adventure? Now, don't pretend to cry because you can't do that either.
Oh, so now you believe it.
Of course I don't believe it, not one single stupid word of it.
Chef,
I'm getting out of here, out of this building, and don't think I'm ever coming back because I'm not coming back ever.
you will, you have to.
Oh, you mean the spell? Ha! We'll see about the spell. Taxi! Taxi!
The first, second, and third acts are there. At least they were in those years. That's the way they were writing plays, and there were 2 intermissions always. And the form, and also, these were plays by extraordinarily fine writers. Clifford Odets, William Inge, and John Van Druten are as good a trio as you could find in those years. And therefore, much of the dialogue could be taken almost verbatim or verbatim. Obviously, you had to open the play up, and there were things that you could say on the stage that you couldn't say in films at certain points. But I would say that there's no comparison between adapting a successful, well-written play compared to writing a screenplay based on a long, involved novel, for example, or even as people have done based on a few newspaper articles.
And sometimes on nothing at all.
And, well, of course, that's another point I might make about myself. I'm not very good at ideas. I am very good at writing other people's ideas. I've written one script with another fellow named Alec Mall that was an original screenplay. I wrote a story with a couple of other people very early in my career, but it was just a trivial, light comedy story. But practically every picture I've done has been an adaptation of a novel or a play, mostly in the latter part of my career from novels. I generally try to see the writer before I write, particularly if I have a great respect for the material. I went to see Bill Inge before I wrote Picnic, and we chatted at his place, his apartment in the famous Dakota Apartments on Central Park West. And I said to him, I hope you're not disappointed in the movie, in the script, and I hope that I'll satisfy you, but is there anything particular that you are wedded to, that you really would be terribly upset if it were not on film? And he had a very strange answer, to me strange anyway. He said, look, it's not mine anymore, it's yours. He said, and I wouldn't care to tell you anything or how I would do it, he said. And it was just like that. I couldn't get anything from him. And actually, that's been true of the other people I've talked to. I talked to William Humphrey before I wrote a script which was not made, on a book called The Ordways. I talked to McKinley Cantor at some length and got to know him. We became very friendly. He was delighted with the treatment I wrote before I wrote the screenplay. That wasn't made either, unfortunately. That's a heartbreaker.
What changes from the play did you make in Picnic?
I can give you an example, and I can give you a character point. In the business of opening up the play, which the second act climax was, at least on film, was the boy and girl sleeping together, followed by the fact that the police were after the boy because he had stolen her boyfriend's car. And then I wrote a scene in which the boy, who was Bill Holden, swam a river and came to this apartment, which he knew the address. And there was a scene between him and the other fellow, which had to do with their problems with women, which sort of was a sort of slow move into the third act. So that was not in the play.
Please, sir, you gotta help me. I have to spend the night someplace, and then I gotta get out of town.
Sure. Get out of those and dry off.
You see, what happened was this.
You don't have to tell me. I understand. All we need is a drink. You got your troubles, and I got mine.
You went for that Owens girl, didn't you? I'll admit they can get under your skin. That doesn't mean we gotta take them too seriously, though. For instance, you wouldn't say a man had to go as far as marrying him. You wouldn't say a thing like that, would you? Not being very helpful.
And the picture would have worked without it, but I think it worked better with it.
When you work on a novel or a play, do you develop your own structure?
Well, let's talk about the more difficult ones. How do you do it in terms of a book which is 820 pages long, like From Here to Eternity? I know a lot of writers use 3x5 cards and tack them up on a board. I don't do that, but I do, I guess, the equivalent of it. I write 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 20 or something like that, up to 40, I don't know, on a sheet of paper and try to fill in the material which I've selected from the book, which I probably have read 10 times. And I've synopsized for myself, very specially, with notes about page 39 is something I want. And I try to fit the material that I've selected into a 1, 2, 3 pattern. A first act, a second act, third act, a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is, I think, the basic form for all plays, for me anyway, all dramatic writing. And then, if possible, if some of the material is so good or so vital and doesn't seem to work, I take endless time trying to figure out a way to make it work, to put something else in front of it that makes it work, to put one of the characters, perhaps from a later scene, into that scene, so that if I'm using him for the same purpose, it might work for that. If it doesn't work, eventually I have to throw it away. But I try to save every dramatic thing, every great piece of exchange of dialogue, for example, or something which gives me an idea for a picture that the camera can relate to. That's more or less the way I do it, and eventually you boil it down, and then you start writing it from page one. In the early days, I used to write long treatments and include some dialogue. I didn't do that much lately.
How did censorship work then?
There was no censorship problem, except you could never show a boy and girl sleeping together, or even say that. You had to do it in an around the corner method.
But today, that's the whole picture.
I know, today it's the whole picture, but sometimes it was very good not to be able to show that, because the writer had to use some imagination to convey it to the audience, and to convey the fact that it was very passionate to the audience. Well, that was in that situation was in Golden Boy. We had to just write around it. No way of saying it straight out.
How much interference did you have then from the front office and the director?
It was much better then. I think that at that point, and I'm talking about the late 30s, the 40s, and into the 50s, the producer was much more important, particularly at some studios, than the director. The writer, of course, except occasionally, was not as important as either of them, unfortunately. I'm talking about their attitude, not my attitude. Fox, 20th Century Fox was known as a producer studio. Zanuck, who was the head of it, had been a writer, but he was also, more importantly, a producer. And he leaned on producers. Harry Cohen was much more a writer's man. In fact, he liked to taunt his producers. In a meeting with a producer, a director, and a writer in his office, Cohen would almost always direct his questions first to the writer. It's interesting. The director he paid a lot of respect to, but then he would, if he wanted to make a nasty crack, he would make it about the producer. Also, I think then that the producers who selected the writers selected them on the basis of this is the man who was going to, or woman who was going to write the script. And that's it. There was no idea that after that I'll get a guy to polish it for, and if that doesn't work, I'll go and get a $1 million a week writer, or $1 million a rewrite writer from New York. And then I understand now there's something else, a word which it shocks me. It's called a closer. They now have a term for getting a closer, meaning he will come in at the very end, and that will be the end of the script. He will close it. He will write some dialogue, or cut out some dialogue, or do whatever a closer is supposed to do. I always thought a closer was a horse that ran fast in a stretch. But I think that is one of the major differences in the problems of the writer then and today. They did not have to worry about the fact that somebody was in the next office writing the same script, or that 3 other writers were going to follow them anyway, so what was the point of not just knocking it out? It was a whole different type of approach to writing.
Do you polish a script as you write?
Well, I work scene by scene by scene, but I never move, or practically never move on to another scene until I have finished the scene before to my absolute satisfaction. I may rewrite that scene, as I think I've said a dozen times, and I might come back later on and change a line here and there, but I am satisfied with it. I would show that scene to anybody in the business. Wouldn't be embarrassed by it. In the next scene, I would do exactly the same the same with. In other words, I would go on and write. It's very long. It takes a lot of time.
How long does it take you to write a first draft?
Depends again on the picture. Much quicker for a play than a long novel. But I can take 5, 6 months to write what I consider a first draft. I cannot knock out a first draft so they can look at it, which is another phrase that I hold in contempt. But I don't mind that, because when I hand it in, it's my job. I've done this job. My name is on it, and I want to be as proud of it as I possibly can. And every writer may work on it in a different way entirely. I, for example, always, when I start to work finally at 1 o'clock or at midnight or whenever it is, I always look at the last scene I have written the day before. And I study it a little bit, and then I see how it would flow with maybe the first line that I'm going to write in this next scene, or how it would affect the line that I might have had in mind. And I do that every time I sit down at the typewriter. Robert Anderson and I were talking about how we approach writing, and I mentioned that to him, and he said, if I did that, I could never finish a picture, never finish a script. He said, I train myself, when I start writing in the morning, never to look back at what I have written from day one. And I don't do it change that method of writing ever.
Have actors improved your screenplays very often?
Most of the time, in the pictures that I've written, the dialogue is not ad-libbed, and there's very little improvisation, if any. Maybe a line or a word or something like that, but not big hunks of stuff.
How about when you worked with Frank Sinatra?
Sinatra read the lines. He definitely, he did not mangle the script at all.
Here, wear this. My sister sent it to me. She buys everything too big. Look, first we hit a few bars, see? Then we go to a place of which I am a member, the new Congress Club. Girls. You got any prejudices against girls? That's what I thought.
Sinatra, see, one of the reasons perhaps, today he might, I don't know, but he needed that picture very badly. This was his one chance to come back from here to eternity.
How important is the camera to your writing? Do you write in camera directions?
Well, that's an interesting question, because that's another thing that's changed, I think, in the way writers approach what they have to do to satisfy the people they're getting the money from. Today, I would hesitate to write camera directions. I think that it's considered bad form, bad writing. The director will resent it. He won't pay any attention to it. They only read up and down the middle, and so on. But when I was writing the pictures I enjoyed writing, I wrote definitely for the camera. Now, that doesn't mean I put in every shot or every camera angle or anything like that. But you can do a scene, and if it isn't in a close-up, you've lost the scene. I think the camera is the audience's eye. And if you don't respect it and think about it when you're writing, you're really not writing for the movies. You may be writing a play, or you may be writing an essay, I don't know, but the camera is an absolute sine qua non of the writer. I think he must think in terms of it. Today, I don't know how you get around it, and I don't mean you have to say the camera moves or something like that. But it may be important to say, as I just mentioned, this scene should be in close-up. I wouldn't write it that way, but and that could be the whole scene. I've written scenes where a close-up had 20 lines of one person talking, and then Brando would cut it out.
How did you enjoy your only experience as a director, directing Bette Davis? What a way to break in.
The picture was called Storm Center. It starred Bette Davis. It was in the McCarthy period, and it was the first and perhaps only picture that I can recall, except for the Woody Allen picture, and the name of it I can't remember, and that came, the front, and that came later and was on a different aspect of the McCarthy era, I think. This was a picture about guilt by association and book burning. Betty Davis played a librarian in a small town. I enjoyed the experience of working as a director quite a bit. I did find out something that as a writer I hadn't suspected. I always thought the writer was the loneliest man in the world, and that the director had friends around him, and he had people to help him, and it was a cinch. It wasn't. And the friends around you and the other people in other departments are very busy doing their own work and their own thing, and that's what they think about. You are the only one really who is thinking about, the producer can, but you are the only one who is thinking about fitting it all together. And I found myself very lonely being a director, as lonely almost as being a writer. But I enjoyed the fact that the business of working with people. It was wonderful working with Betty Davis. I do remember an interesting point. We had a week of rehearsals, or 4 days of rehearsals, at the studio before we moved to Santa Rosa, where practically the whole picture was shot. That's a city north of San Francisco, about 40 miles. A lot of it was shot in their library. We were to meet at the first day of rehearsal at a sound stage in the Columbia lot at 9 a.m. All the actors were to be there, and we were to read the script. So at about 5 minutes of 9 or 10 minutes of 9, I started to my office down to the set. On the way, I passed the production department, and they stopped me. They saw me coming. They said, "Come in here, we got a problem." So I took about 10, 15 minutes working with them on whatever the problem was, and then I went over to the set, and there were all of the actors seated around the table, and Betty Davis was there. And we read the script. The interesting thing to me first was that she didn't read the script. She knew the script. She knew every line, word for word, on the first day of rehearsal, let alone shooting. But then it was, I thought, quite a successful reading, and it took a couple of hours, and then we were finished, and Betty called me aside, and she said, almost like a school teacher, she said, "I want you to know something. This rehearsal was set for 9 a.m., and I was here at 9 a.m., and I don't want to go to any other shooting or set or anywhere that's called for a certain hour if you're not there." So she was telling me something, and I can tell you that I was never late on any set after that. But it was fun working with her. She had a good sense of humor. She was part of the gang. On a location, it's quite different than shooting in a studio where everybody goes to different homes at night. The bars and the whole convivial attitude is totally different and very, very pleasant most of the time.
Do you write for a particular actress or actor?
We wrote, the Storm Center was written for no particular actress, but the actress we tried to get was Mary Pickford, and we got her. I read the script to her at Vic Fair. This was years before the picture was made, by the way. Stanley Kramer was then going to produce it, and he owned it, bought it from us. And she loved it, and she seemed to know what it was about, and she didn't seem to mind it. And we got first page on the New York Times on Mary Pickford's return to the screen, etc. We kept the subject matter secret because if we tell us it's about a library, as Willie Wyler said, you may as well put theater closed up on the marquee. And then Ward Bond and Hedda Hopper and some of the people on the far right got to Mary Pickford, and although she went for fittings and the sets were being built, She walked out, said something about some idiotic excuse that they concocted for it, that Kramer couldn't get a color commitment. So then it just sat on the shelf until Julian Blaustein, who went to college with me, who had been a producer at Fox for many years, and I got a contract, one of the first independent deals with Columbia, and we made the picture Columbia. And how we made it, if we get to Harry Cohen, is an interesting story.
Well, let's hear it.
Well, everybody thinks Harry Cohen was a bully and a monster and a cutthroat and whatever, all of which he was to some degree. But he also, this is also a point I'd like to make in terms of people making movies today and then. I don't think what happened on that picture could ever happen today in a studio. Mike, as an independent, but this was in a major studio. Blaustein and I had bought Bell Book and Candle, and we came to this independent production deal with that in mind as our first picture. But then we remembered that that studio owned Storm Center, which was then called the Library. And both Julie and I felt we'd love to make this picture because it deserved to be made. It was about something we thought was very important to the country and to ourselves. And we started to badger Cohen to let us make the movie. And he, of course, said ridiculous. And we never gave up. We finally came, we would leave poems on his desk, and we would call him 3 times a day and say, how about that now? And he kept saying, no way. And then finally we said to him, look, we will do the picture for nothing. This will be an extra picture. It will not count on our deal. We will take no money to produce or direct it. So script is already written, so. Well, that threw him for a bit. But he still said, yeah, I can't do it. I'm the head of the studio, but I've got people in New York who also are very important. And they have to, okay, or I have to tell them reasons why I will make a picture and so on. I don't remember, but about 2 weeks after that, then we said maybe we can get Betty Davis. Not sure, but maybe. He said that wouldn't make any difference. And about 2 weeks later, we were in his office. We're going to the same old song, doing our dance. And Ben Kahane, whose office was across the way from Harry's, came in. He was the vice president, a rather important man. And finally, he was there. And finally, Cohen said, all right, take $800,000 and make your goddamn picture. And Kahane blew up and said, Harry, for God's sake, you know this has got to be a flop. And Cohen said, yes, Ben, Columbia's had flops before, but we've never had a flop with such enthusiasm. And I can't imagine anybody saying that today, or doing that today in a studio.
Let's go back to another storm center, World War II. How did you get into it? And what did you do in the war, Daddy?
Well, I got into the war by first getting a very low draft number. I was drafted in May. I didn't get into the war at this time, but I was drafted in May 1941, which is about 6 or 7 months before Pearl Harbor. But my mother was dying. I was in Miami Beach then. I wasn't writing any for those couple of years, of cancer. And there was no war yet, that we were in. And the draft board said, I was the only child. The draft board said they would agree, and it was absolutely terminal case. There was no doubt about that. And the draft board said, we will keep you on file and let you stay as a civilian until your mother dies. And she died in February of 1942. Yeah. After Pearl Harbor, yeah. So then they gave me 1 more month, and then I was drafted into an infantry division in the headquarters corps. But a lot of it was very rugged stuff. And we also moved from Jacksonville, which was our first place of work, to Louisiana, to swampy Louisiana. And while there, we were on what they called Louisiana maneuvers, which in some respects was more grim than the war. But that went on for months. Eventually, I went to officer candidate school at the Signet Corps in Fort Monmouth. And then I was sent to, after I graduated, I was an excellent soldier, which baffled me, something I could never understand. But anyway, they sent me to the Army War College in Washington, and Ed North was there too, old friend, old screenwriter, young screenwriter then. And they had us do a group of pictures called the Fighting Men series, which were little stories with lessons in each one for the infantry. And in doing that, and the Army stuff, the Army infantry experience with most of the men that I knew in the Army were not draftees. They were real old-line 30-year men, and they were very tough. They were very good soldiers, but they could be very grim. And when I came to write From Here to Eternity, I had some experience which I think was invaluable in kind of sensing what was going on in James Jones' mind with his characters. And of course, Jones was in the Army for quite a long while. But that's how I got, that's the story of my war. I didn't get out until got in 40, I mean, I got out in 46, yeah, early 46.
Did you draw a lot on your Army experiences in writing Eternity?
I think I did. I didn't. If I didn't do it consciously, I know I did it unconsciously.
I ain't gonna move around you again.
Something tells me you need a lesson, Pruitt. Maybe I'll give it to you myself.
Come on, leave him alone, Ike. He's in my detail now. You're gonna get in trouble if you fight around here. Get back to work. Get out of the way!
I knew that I didn't have to wonder about some strange thing, let's say, that a soldier would do. And say, well, why would he do that? I would know why he would do that. And if I had to explain it, I would know how to explain it. So I think probably more unconsciously than consciously, but maybe both ways. It helped me a great deal.
How did Eternity get to be made?
Well, Harry Cohen bought the book, and everybody called him crazy. Cohen's Folly. He paid $85,000 for it, which was a fortune then. It was a book which is perceived as violently anti-Army, so everybody said the Army's not going to help you, and you got to cast soldiers, you've got to have huge scenes of production, barracks, and where are you going to get them? And then it was considered almost a pornographic book.
Did he buy it before Pearl Harbor or after Pearl Harbor?
Oh no, this was after the war. He bought it in 51 or 52, I think. No, 51 or late 50, I'm not sure. Probably 51. And as far as I know, no other writer, and how are you going to get around the pornography? How are you going to get around the adultery? And how are you going to get around this and that? And how are you going to get around the whorehouse? And how are you going to get around all the dirty words which were loaded? There wasn't a page without 4-letter words. And I don't mean damn.
But it was a sensitive story that came to a climax with the attack on Pearl Harbor.
No picture ever had a better ending.
Was James Jones' story a bestseller?
The novel From Here to Eternity was an immensely successful. It was on top of the bestseller list for I don't remember how many weeks now, probably 5 months minimum. And it was quite a wonderful novel. I think it's got amazing reviews from top critics. It was 820 pages long, and it was the story of an infantry unit in Hawaii before Pearl Harbor and including Pearl Harbor. It was 800, as I mentioned, it was 820 pages. Harry Cohn bought the book for movies for Columbia Pictures for $85,000, and everybody said, this is Cohen's folly. That's what they called it. They said, there's no way you can make a movie out of this book of any quality whatsoever, because you'd have to transfix the book. You'd have to just turn it upside down. How do you deal with the anti? It was considered a very anti-army book, totally. It really wasn't, if you were careful when you read it, and if you understood the motivation of the leading character, which Monty Clift played, called Prue. And it was also a pornographic book. Most people felt that it was, a lot of people felt it was pornographic, because it had army adultery. It had every dirty word or four-letter word you could think of on almost every page. There was probably no way the Army would ever agree to give you the kind of equipment you needed to make the picture, the soldiers, the barracks. It just seemed to be impossible. And the first thing he did was ask James Jones to write a treatment, sort of an outline of how he would do it if he were the screenwriter. As far as I know, Jones was the only writer who worked on From Here to Eternity before I did, and I was the only writer who worked on it then. Well, when I read Jones' treatment, I'll tell you how I got the job in a minute, but when I read Jones' treatment, since I've just alluded to the censorship problems, I was absolutely shocked. He just totally ruined the book. He was so afraid of censorship that in the novel, the adultery was between the first sergeant of a company and the wife of the captain. In his treatment, that was a sister of the captain. So there goes your movie. And he did that all along. He just changed his own novel because I guess he felt writing for the movies is a different thing, and you have to watch out for the minefields. At any rate, I read the book, and I didn't read it with the intention of maybe I could write this. I just read it as a novel. And I liked it very much, but I did not see how you could make a movie out of it. And then Madeline and I were driving from Miami to New York, and somehow out of clear blue sky I was thinking about the book, and I got a couple of ideas, one of which was an absolute key, as I'll tell you in a minute. And I said, well, maybe you can make a picture out of this book. Wait a minute. So I read it again with the ideas that had somehow come out of the blue. And then I was going to California anyway, and when I got there, I saw Eve Ettinger, who was the story editor at Columbia, and I said, I think I know how to lick this novel. So she got me an interview with Buddy Adler, who had been in the Army as a lieutenant colonel. Well, a major. Maybe he got out as a lieutenant colonel, I'm not sure, but certainly a major. And he was a producer at Columbia, and he had been given the job of making this picture, which was then on the shelf. And I told Buddy the ideas. So he picked up the phone and he called Harry, because he liked him very much. He picked up the phone, he called Harry Cohen, and that night we were in Harry Cohen's bedroom, because that's where he liked to have his major conferences. It was in his bedroom on the second floor of a mansion in Beverly Hills. And I said to him, in the novel, there's a character named Maggio who's very amusing, very good, tough little guy from Brooklyn, and has all the faults you could ask for, but also has great humor. And in the novel, he, at a certain point, after being in the stockade for breaking rules and whatnot for several months, 6 months or 4 months, I don't remember now. He then gets a Section 8 discharge and goes back to Brooklyn. The Section 8 discharge was for maladjusted soldiers. It's a psychiatric discharge.
Insanity?
Well, yes, close to it or it. Also in the novel, Prue, who is the leading character, is a great bugler. He's played taps at Arlington. And in the novel, the only time he plays taps, he practically doesn't play the bugle at all because he's a good boxer too, but he refuses to fight for the boxing team of the company because he blinded a man at boxing, and he swore he'd never box again.
And he saw a golden boy.
And so the only time he plays taps in the novel, and it's beautifully written. It's a page of prose, how he picks up a bugle one night and goes out in the middle of the barracks on the grass and plays, and Jones describes the way the melody and how the men listen to him. But I say there's no connection there. The way I would like to do it is not send Maggio back to Brooklyn, but have him die with Prue when he dies, and some other soldiers around him suffer because of the beating he suffered and the terrible brutality that went on in the stockade from the top down. And that night, he takes the bugle and goes out and plays taps. Well, that's the key to the whole, really it is. Then I also said, I think that several other things. There are two love stories in which two people have really 3 acts by themselves. They never cross. You never see them together. And I would like to intercut the love stories. We never see a scene with one pair without seeing a scene with the other pair following it. You don't have any intervening scenes ever. And I feel that the audience will feel there's a relationship between these 4 people, even if they don't see them together. And that's the way it worked out. And I also said, I think we might get the Army if we made a major change in the book. I made one other change, too. I said, if instead, in the novel, the captain, who is really a dreadful person, a dreadful soldier, the irony of it is he gets a promotion from captain to major. And that's one of the reasons they felt it was an anti-Army book. This is what the Army does to its rotten apple. So I said, I think we should have him thrown out of the Army.
Upon observing these incidents, an investigation was made by the Inspector General's Department over a period of several months. It was found that Captain Holmes has been guilty of indefensible cruelty to the aforesaid Private Pruitt.
Holmes, first thing I learned in the Army was that an officer takes care of his men. Seems to be the first thing that you forgot. My only regret is that we have to keep you in uniform until a court-martial is concluded.
Or any way to avoid a court-martial, sir.
There is one alternative, General, if you're so disposed. A resignation for the good of the service under Army regulations.
Write a letter of resignation. Have it on my desk this afternoon. As far as I'm concerned, the quicker you're out of the Army, the better for everybody, especially the Army.
I think let us give the Army credit for finding its rotten apple. And maybe that turns it upside down. Maybe the Army will think about it more, and worked. And then the last thing I said was, there's a 150-page sequence in the novel which is entirely inside the stockade, and which details very explicitly all the brutal beatings and the hole which they put these guys in, which was worse than solitary confinement. It was in a hole, literally. And it goes on and on. It's beautifully written, and you believe all the horror of it. But I said, I think we can do it without showing all that, and I don't think the American people want to see American soldiers doing this to American soldiers.
I'm going to escape from this dump. Kimball's basement couldn't hold me, neither can no lousy stockade. Shut up. Whatever you say, Brownie.
I think we can do it by showing Maggio going in as a blustering guy, full of pep, full of vitality, great shape physically.
Hello, tough monkey.
And show him when he comes out, and he dies in the next scene, and it's as a result of the beating, and that the audience will draw their own inference of what went on in the stockade.
I figured you'd be here at Joyce. I done it, Prue. I escaped just like I said, just like I figured. In the back of a truck on the top. They rode me right out, just like I figured. Only the tailgate opened up, Prue, about a mile back, and I fell out in the road. He said, see me bounce. I must have broke something. Prue, listen. Fatso done it, Prue. He likes to whack me in the gut. He asked me if it hurts. I spit at him like always. Only yesterday, it was bad. He hit me. He hit me. He hit me. I had to get out, Prue. I had to get out. Why? They're going to send you to the stockade, Prue. No, they ain't going to send me to the stockade. Watch out for Fatso. Watch out for Fatso. He'll try to crack you. And if they put you in a hole, don't yell. Don't make a sound. You'll still be yelling when they come to take you out. Just lay there. Just lay there. And be quiet, Prue.
Well, those were the several major items which made Cohen say, when do you want to start? And I said, I said to him, I always like to write both at the studio and at home, or in some, until we finally bought a home here and rented a home of friends or people. And I said, do you mind if I write this at home, some of this at home? And he said, with this book, I don't care if you write it in a whorehouse. So that's really the tale of how I...
How long did it take to write that screenplay?
I wrote a long treatment. I think it was 135 pages, and that took about 2-3 months. And then I wrote a first draft in probably 4 months. And then they got Zinnemann on the picture, which is another long story which we don't have time for. But then Cohen began to hold meetings with Adler, the producer, Zinnemann, and me. And I tell you, I rewrote every comma in that script because that's all I was willing to do. We were fighting him all the way. Every once in a while, I have to be honest, he came up with a hell of an idea or a notion which led to a great idea. I can remember once he said, I must hear the boy play the bugle before he plays taps in the script. I said, no, that'll ruin that moment. The audience had been waiting for him to play, and I gave him my arguments. It became obvious to me, though, that after several weeks of this butting our heads together, that I wasn't going to win this one. And that made me sit down and think of a way where could I have him play the bugle? And I've found a very good way. If you've seen the picture, you'll know that it adds to the picture. It actually is a plus. So Cohen simulated it.
What about that famous love scene on the beach? Was that in the novel originally?
Yes, some of it. That I had to change because in the novel she had gonorrhea, which she contracted from her husband. And that, of course, could not be done. No way.
Today, yes.
Today.
Today, that's the opening.
So I came up with the notion of what is in the beach scene, which is that she was pregnant and that she told him she was having labor pains a little early, and he was going out that night to an officers' meeting, which was really with a hat check girl. She said she felt that labor pains were coming, and he kind of laughed at her and said, much too early. And when he came home at 4 or 5 in the morning, she was out cold, and the baby had been born dead, and a pool of blood, and so on. And that got by the censors. There was no problem with that. The second change that I made, which I think was a major, from the point of view, again, of what the camera sees and where, the love part of the scene, which is towards the end and a little in the beginning, is played in the novel in a hotel room. I put it on the beach. And you know, it came out, you just picture that scene being played in a hotel room, 2 people half dressed or something like that, instead of bathing suits. I think that was a major improvement in terms, if you had to make a movie out of this. Maybe in real life they would have been in the bedroom, but this was a little liberty I took.
It made Waikiki famous. Now, you changed the character of Maggio as it was in the book and made him famous. Who did you have in mind when you wrote it, and how did you get whom you got?
I was very much involved in the casting of the picture, and I was very pleased that Cohen wanted me in on everything, because he really appreciated the fact that this book had been licked, and they were going to make a movie of it, and also that the Army finally said, yes, go ahead, we'll give you Schofield Barracks, we'll give you all the training people you want, we'll give you whatever you need. You need soldiers, we'll give you soldiers. When you need an airplane, we'll give you an airplane. And we did use an airplane. So I was in on everything. And the first person, they tested, I think, only one person before Sinatra. And that was Eli Wallach, a wonderful actor, very tough, grim guy. And it was an excellent test, first-rate test. Zinman was very pleased, Adler, we all were. Then Wallach's agent got into the act, and he asked for exactly twice the salary that Wallach had gotten for his last picture. Cohen said, tell him to go to hell. I will not give any actor twice his salary from any preceding picture, particularly when he's a nobody. Because he was not a big star. He was a character actor, and he was a wonderful actor. So then we didn't know what to do. Now, in the meantime, Sinatra had been pestering Cohen with telephone calls from Africa, where Ava Gardner was doing a picture, and he was there with her, writing him notes, getting friends to say, Cohen, Sinatra would be great in this part. You got to give him a test. At least let him test. Finally, Sinatra offered to fly to Hollywood from Africa and do the test. And I remember the day he did the test. He came up to my office and he said, how do I play this scene? He knew the scene. He said, how do I play it? So I said, it's easy. All you have to do is make him laugh and cry. That's no problem. Anyway, he made the test. And it was good, but it didn't compare actors in terms of acting with Wallach. But there was something about it that was interesting. This was a scene in which Maggio is drunk, really drunk.
You get dressed? You put your clothes on? Will you wait for me? I'll get a cab.
Yeah, sure.
Will you wait?
Yeah, you get a cab.
He's on a bench in front of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel with Monty Cliff, the artist, crew, and then 2 MPs come along. And Sinatra sees the MPs, and it's like a bull seeing a red flag. And he starts to throw his shoes at the MPs. And of course they grab him and knock him out. Well, when Wallach played that scene, he looked as if he could take on those MPs. He was very muscular, very fit. Sinatra, when he set out, throws the shoes at the MP, he looked like a plucked chicken. You know, the bones were sticking out. He only weighed about, 120 pounds, 130 pounds. And that gave a whole different dimension to the character, that he wasn't afraid, although he knew he could never stand up to these guys. So he took Sinatra, especially when Sinatra agreed to do the picture for $1,000 a week for 8 weeks.
Dan, thanks for the inside view of how a writer works. And now to conclude, the big question. What would you advise a writer getting started in the movie business today to do?
Pray. Or go into another business. I don't know. I can't answer that question because I'd like to get into the business myself. And nobody rings the phone for an elderly adapter. I think
Do you think it's more of a disadvantage to be older or to be younger?
Oh, it's much more disadvantage to be older. There's age discrimination in this business is extraordinary, particularly in television, but also in films. I don't think there's any doubt that. If I were young, I would try writing and doing what I did, entering contests, perhaps. The Nickel Fellowship that the Academy does draws 30. We had 3,900 scripts this year from all over the country, some from Europe. And they're practically all of them are written by people under 35 or 30. And some of them are damn good. And some of them they have not bought the scripts because they're not the type of subject matter that The Terminator is. But they hired them for other scripts to write pictures, and it gave them a big start. So that's one way. Another way, God knows, if you have a friend who knows a good agent, because it's an agent's business today.
Well, considering the advice you've just given, if you were starting out today, would you become a lawyer instead of a writer?
That's a good question. Well, since I got an Oscar, I guess and I was president of the Academy, I guess I'd have to say I still would have been a writer. But I would be very tempted. I was tempted to answer it the other way.
Well, Dan, we're all happy you didn't become a lawyer, because then we might never have had moments like these in our movies, moments to remember forever. Or should I say, from here